All right, hello everyone. So my name is Brian. We're going to talk about can Hollywood learn the right lessons from successful films? And in this case, we're talking about Top Gun Maverick because Top Gun Maverick was very successful. It has done fantastic business for Hollywood. And so, of course, that all makes us think, well, we're going to get a sequel. Now we're going to get the Crimson Tide reboot. What else are we going to get? How are we going to do these things? It's this idea, learning the right lessons from successful films that we seem to so often do wrong. It's like this is the reason why after Avatar does very well, we have to have 3D movies for half a decade, even though the movies didn't need to be 3D. Or why after The Dark Knight we have, the obligatory scene where the bad guy gets captured and put in his little jail cell and the protagonist interrogates him and then he escapes and it's like, oh, he planned this the whole time. It's like we seem to learn the surface level lessons as filmmakers and we say it's this reactive way of filmmaking. It's this, oh, we thought you liked this. Well, don't you want more? And the audience is like, no, we moved on. That was cool. We want to see the next new thing, and you're supposed to do that. We thought you're the creatives, so show us those things. So I want to talk about this. I want to talk about what would be the things we could see in Top Gun that are on a deeper level, that are working in a deeper way. You look at this on a surface, it's very similar to the first movie. This is a movie that is almost a very good film in spite of itself. It's in some ways just another reboot, just another soft sequel that's basically a closet remake. So a lot of things are working against this movie, and it's not until we start seeing the footage of things and start seeing the trailers, start hearing about the incredible sequences they did, that this starts to become very interesting. So the success of this is something that we should not take for granted and try to understand in a deeper way. So I'll say a few things about myself. I am a filmmaker. I'm obviously not a blockbuster, at the top of the business kind of filmmaker. You can see some of the things I've done on YouTube. I have a film that I've finished now that's kind of waiting to be released, trying to figure out how to go about that. So I have a lot of time at the moment to just look at the business and comment on things. And I've really loved seeing the YouTube film critique space grow. I think there's a lot of openness there. There seems to be kind of a lot of the future there. A lot of the written reviews by the traditional papers are pretty short and pretty tame as far as what they have to say. There's not that much there. But on YouTube, people are really noticing things and sharing their thoughts. So I thought I wanted to join in on that and do so in a bit of a longer form where we can really get into things in more detail. So that'll be the perspective that I'm coming from. And we're going to talk about this in the sense of both the internal things in the film and also the ecosystem, the environment that the film opens into, because I think this is not something that filmmakers think enough about. So without that further ado, we'll get started. So when we say Top Gun is a success, let's define that a little bit. So we can look at some box office statistics here, and we're looking at almost $1.5 billion globally. And then a very good distribution as far as across domestic and international. So domestic, of course, is the United States, and I think they include Canada as well in that. And that's a nice distribution. It's not just domestic, it's not just international. It's evenly split between around the world. And then, looking at this run, I mean, when this first came out, you could read articles and they said, oh, okay, it did a good opening, 126 some million on that opening. So yeah, probably over the course of its life, maybe it'll make 400 million, So then, yeah, that tracks when you see it dropping here. A month later, it's down to 3, and then it just keeps going. It's like back to 1, month later, staying there, down, down, down. End of July, down to 7 in August, and then what? It's back up again, all the way here. Labor Day, number 1 again. So this is really unprecedented for this to be 100 days in back to number 1. It's not just the quality of the film that's going on here. It's also perhaps the lack of other interesting offerings that Hollywood has had. Everything's been very child oriented. So you have something that is at least pretending to be grounded in the real world. There's a currency that's been forgotten to just doing something like that. Also, there's definitely articles out there as well. This is one of them that talks about some of the demographic breakdown of the film, and they really point out that this has been fairly successful, really across age groups and across races, which is very interesting. Again, with a lot of trends, we've seen things trending younger and less buy-in from older audiences, and this lines up with my anecdotal experience of just seeing this film in the theater. And yeah, seeing older people, seeing younger people, seeing families together. That it's kind of you sort of forget what that used to be like, and then once you go to the theater and you see that, you see people of all ages, you're like, oh wow, I forgot that this was like this to go to the theater. So that's been very interesting. These are all things that should make filmmakers really look closely at this film, which at the surface you could kind of say, well, it's kind of formulaic. It's just another remake. What's the real thing that's going on here? But when there is such a big response by the audience, we really have to ask what's happening. So yeah, I mean, the next question you might ask is this movie good? You know, is there anything going on with it that is special? And yeah, because we could say some of the wrong lessons, you know. Well, okay, let's just make. I guess military movies are in now, so let's just make more of those. There's probably a lot of discussions in those top floors at Paramount saying, you know, what do we do? What are we going to make a Top Gun sequel? Are we going to make number 3? And you know, I would hope that they don't do that for reasons we can get into later. But there's going to be an obvious draw to do that. So, you know, instead of saying, let's learn these really surface level lessons from the audience here, what can we learn that's in more detail? What's really happening in the craft of the filmmaking that's making this work? So to do that, we're going to start by going back to the original Top Gun here. We're going to go back and we're going to watch the intro. So we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so we will say some more about this in a second, but now we're going to watch the opening to the new Top Gun. All right. So obviously they're extremely similar. They're almost exactly the same. The music, this new version that Hans Zimmer and his team is doing is like very much a just an updating of the original Harold Faltermeyer theme, and obviously they're once again on an aircraft carrier doing all these things, and so it's like you could look at this on the surface level and just say, okay, well that's cool, so you did what the original is doing, good for you. Let's actually think about what this opening is doing, though. It's like you have in this, just starting with something like having your opening titles, and you start the movie and you've got your names and everything. You're not introducing any plot yet. You're just showing you something that's very cool. We all like fighter jets, and it's like, this is not something that movies do anymore. They're not introducing you to any characters yet. They're just giving you tone and imagery. And this is like, we always seem to be jumping into the plot, you would say in medias res, just right away in modern films. It's like, cut this stuff out, get rid of this opening. You want to get to the story, you want to get in and get out. And instead, it's like this movie, both these films, they have a trust that you're going to be interested in what they're showing you. They trust you to think fighter jets are cool because you're in the theater. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, I like jets, And this is something where it's like, I think a lot of us modern filmmakers, we get in the way of ourselves a little bit. And we think, well, it's our style, it's our ideas that people are interested in. And it's like, no, like, we want to see fighter jets. Like, this is cool. Just show us the stuff. Show us the cool things that are out there. That's what movies are about. And this, you could say that kind of idea, you could say there's maybe two ways that people have thought about films from the beginning. One is to show you the world in some way as it is, show you the interesting sights and sounds of the world, and the other is the constructed reality. We could look at two examples just real quick here, of that, which would be, very early movies, Lumiere brothers. This is, guys, just two Frenchmen, two brothers going around and filming the world for the first time, showing these clips to people, and they're very domestic, but then they start traveling the world. Then they're showing people things that they can't see in their normal lives because they're not there. There's this aspect of just bringing the world to places. And in this sense, it's like the camera and the cameraman, the crew, they're not important. They are just a delivery system to show you things that you haven't seen before, to show you things in the world that you don't have access to. Obviously, early cinema, this is even more important of a role now, because cinema is the only thing performing this function, or aside from photography and paintings. Now, obviously, we have the entire internet to do this for us, so this role in cinema is a bit depleted from what it was. But then all that means is that you are going to show people more extreme things than people dancing. This is like your YouTube. And then this is what you want to see when you go to the theater. And it's not as much a constructed reality as it is a reality that is out there that you don't have access to. You get to see these people that are really good at their jobs. I can only assume that these people on the deck are not actors. They're the real people. Why would the Navy let actors do that? Why would you train actors to do that when the real people who do it can do it? And we've gotten so far away from this with films. It's like having non-actors just doing what they do well. I mean, there's a real joy to that. I love it. There's this shot of these three guys that are just like looking as these jets go by. Here we go. It's like just seeing people do what they do it well. That's been lost. What we are in now, you could say the opposite extreme of this, which goes back to the beginning as well, is this constructed reality. This is the more of the stage tradition versus, you could say, the photographic tradition of cinema. And this is Trip to the Moon, George Méliès, maybe the earliest science fiction film, and it's exactly what is said in the title. You've got these guys building their spaceship, basically Interstellar from 1902. And a lot more silly. So this is an entirely constructed reality. You would be able to tell that this is a set, I'm sure, even in the day that this came out. But it's like, well, it's not a problem. It's you've got that, as people like to say, suspension of disbelief. So really, it feels like modern blockbusters lean almost entirely into this way of thinking about movies. And then Top Gun comes along, and it gives you this kind of movie, where the sense of the filmmakers doing their filmmakerly stuff is really depleted. You don't see the craft as much. You just see the work in front of the camera, and that to some degree is an illusion. This is a very expensive movie. This is a very well planned out movie. I don't remember, there was a clip or an article talking with Claudio Miranda, the director of photography, and he's asking the captain. He asked for permission. Could we move the aircraft carrier? Could we turn its course? And the reason he wanted to do that is to get the sun at the right place in the sky. This is what cinematographers care about, is having your light at the right angle. So it's like you're going to move a whole aircraft carrier just to get the lighting in the right place. And it's like, yeah, we are going to do that because that's very important. So it's like these things are all getting thought about. You can watch this, and the feeling, which is a great choice, is that it feels like there's a camera crew and they just showed up on the deck and they're just filming stuff happening. They're not getting in the way. They're not telling people what to do. Now, in reality, there's probably a mix of both those things. I'm sure there's some things that they are just filming just in a kind of spontaneous way. But a lot of these things, it's like, oh yeah, we want to get a shot of those catapults going up. We want to get a shot of the chain that catches the F-18 as it lands. Like there's all these things that are definitely planned. It's obviously even more so because they're matching the pacing of the original. So they know what kind of shots they need. They know they need to match this style. You've got these longer lenses that has that very observational feel. And all of this is contributing to this sense that we are just witnessing what these people do very well. We're not imposing a cinematic language onto you to the same degree. And we're not imposing the plot onto you. You get to just appreciate this. Now, the other thing I would want to talk about with this opening is the music, of course, which is the same in both, as we said. And I made an interesting connection with this music. I don't know. The obvious thing about it is that it's so joyous. It's so it's celebratory. It isn't like the later Hans Zimmer military movies. You have that very like martial military marching kind of style. I'm a big fan of that too, like the Rock score and everything, Crimson Tide score. But this has this lightness and this hope and this joy about it. And I was like, that's so interesting to do that in a military film. And then I thought, well, is this not like in some way like the opening of Chariots of Fire here? So we're going to watch that too. I think it's obviously a totally different genre. You're like, Brian, why would you bring up this? This has nothing to do with Top Gun. But bear with me. I think these openings are more similar than you would expect.
Wings on our heels.
All right, so that's another iconic opening. Yeah, so what's similar about this? Well, there's this joy, there's this buoyancy. And there's a camera that you forget that the camera's there in a way. Even though this is a hard shot to get. It's like you're on this beach. I guess you're on some kind of golf cart type device. The camera's not perfectly still either. It's not like modern films. Think about how whenever they film people running in this modern movies, there's always this sunset or something, and it's like very perfectly in front. They're all center. There's the shallow focus and everything, and it's always the camera's perfectly still. This camera's not perfect though. It's kind of just tracking, and it's like, oh man, I hope we get the shot. It's just people run by, you see them, And then on there's look at their expressions too. There's this joy. There's this lightness about everything here that actually matches the music. And it's like when you think about this scene, you just imagine this. You go, okay, you got the English Olympic team. They're like the best runners in the world, and they're doing the speech run. You're like, okay, I can see that. But you don't think about this kind of joy. You maybe you think of this more stern, masculine, like, oh, we're the best kind of energy going on, and yet it has this childlike, just fun about it. You're like, maybe I should start running. This man, that's really great. There's just something there that makes you want to participate. It isn't, you don't get the sense of it being an exclusive thing to the same degree as if it was very, very stern and serious. There's this lightness about it. Obviously, the Vangelis score is, pretty influential. You definitely get this. This is pretty early synth stuff. I think it's hard to say. I'm not wanting to say this in a negative way, in like a they stole this sort of way, but it's like, I don't know if you get the Top Gun opening if you don't have the Chariots of Fire opening. They're really doing things pretty similarly too structurally. They're not. Once again, this is something I think maybe all movies did, but you're kind of reaching the peak of it in this time period, this late 70s and early 80s, really into the early 2000s. You had this, but it's like you're not hitting people over the head with plot yet. You're not saying, okay, pay attention now. This is the stuff that you got to know. It's going to come back. You're just giving people time to see what's going on. We can see another example of this if we watch the Blade Runner opening. This is another classic opening of a film, I would say. Another Vangelis score. Ridley Scott, Tony Scott's brother, so the brother of the Top Gun director. And of course, Hans Zimmer does the later score for Blade Runner, just like he does the later score for Top Gun. So a lot of kind of a family dynamic here in some way. A lot of the same people involved. I'll skip through this just a little bit. But this opening follows the same structure. All right. So yeah, this opening never gets old for me. But very similar structure. You've got some text, and then you have a literal thematic statement musically, and then no plot, just visuals and tone. You don't have to do anything as the audience. You just get to watch the scene. You get to think, wow, that's incredible. What is this? What am I seeing? So even though this might be a movie from the opposite train of thinking, as I would say, this is in the Méliès school, not the Lumiere school, you could say. They're still doing the same thing. They are just showing you, and they're not asking you anything. You just get to watch and appreciate this. And this is something that modern movies, for the most part, don't do, because it's like they don't trust you to be interested in what you have to show them. So it's like, well, Blade Runner, I showed up. You see all this cool cyberpunk stuff. You're like, yeah, I'm there. I want to go see that. And then in a modern film, it's like they don't trust you to be interested. So they get into the plot and everything. We can look at an example of this in the new Blade Runner. I don't want to say bad things about it. They're definitely just doing something else. They're less interested in that kind of construction. And you'll see this, it's aesthetically similar in many ways. You would look at this on a surface level and say, well, Ryan, it's a very similar opening. There's a lot of stuff that's the same. And yet they are getting into what they are interested in telling you in the plot much more quickly. So we'll skip through this. There's a lot of text in this one. And boom. Now we're already into plot. It's like, okay, you think this is the same thing as the opening. You've already got a faster shot pace for sure. So you can't really just appreciate the individual thing. You're appreciating the motion through this. And then it's like, oh, boom, okay, well, that's cool. Like that spinner goes through just like in the first one, how it moves through the frame. And then it's like, oh, actually, no, you need to pay attention to this. That spinner is important. It's going somewhere. You need to know where that's going. And you're off on the plot, So again, I'm not trying to say this to say something bad about the new one. It's just running a different kind of project, you could say. The directors are interested in different things. So yeah, it's like, okay, maybe the new Blade Runner has its merits. Neither of the two Blade Runners did well financially, so maybe that's not a good thing to think about as far as doing something that the audience wants. But it is working in the same way, at least the old ones. And this is something that Tom Cruise and the filmmakers, Joseph Kosinski and Christopher McQuarrie, these are things that they understood about their audience, I think, is that they want to see this stuff. They want to be invested in the world, not just in the plot and everything. I mean, you ask people about the old Top Gun, nobody seems to remember what actually happens, but they remember the imagery of it. So that's this approach here. It's literally imagery first. This style, you could say, continues into the film as we go. We get, not right into the plot after this, but now we saw the military stuff. Now we're going to get some character stuff. We're going to get Maverick stuff. And he's here, and it's like, how are we going to define him? We get the past. We get the things that are still haunting him, so to speak. And you also see, okay, well, he literally lives in an aircraft hangar. Like, this is his life. You think that's pretty cool. But then it also creates the need psychologically for him to maybe you want to settle down at some point. And obviously that comes back in the movie later. But all that's done in a purely visual way. So that's cool. A lot of the plot mechanics, you could say, are done in a very straightforward way. You get this kind of shot reverse shot, like, oh, they want us to do this, but they said we can't, and you're like, oh, well, let's do it anyway. Some standard coverage there. A lot of the really filmmaking language is quite simple, and it's like, but there's still this idea of trusting the audience. There's a lack of cynicism in engaging people. By the time you get to these scenes where they're talking in the bar, I'm kind of like sitting in theater. I'm looking around at the people that are sitting. I'm going, are people paying attention? Like, this is kind of a slower pace than modern movies. Are people going to follow this? And people did. It's like this scene. When does this start? It's like 20 minutes in. 10 minutes later, we're still in this. We're just talking. We're introducing characters. This is the point in the story when screenwriters are saying you need to be crossing the first threshold into the next, into the larger world. You need to be upending the whole world for the character and putting them in this unusual place. And in this movie, they're just like, no, we're just going to show you these people. We're going to literally film this at a bar. It's going to be like a 12-minute bar scene. And you're just going to meet these people almost as if you met them at a bar in real life. So very minimal stylistic mechanics going on here. Very straightforward Hollywood storytelling. You get these real archetypes of characters. I mean, you got this guy. He's like you could say the recovering frat bro. It's like everyone's dealt with in these very archetypal ways. So you get to see the roles that everyone plays in the group dynamic. And that's really the important things about these scenes. You get a sense of what people do and how they fit into their world in a very simple way. It's like a high school level of thinking that you're using to understand these things. So very uncomplex, but the film knows what it wants you to think about each of the characters, and then it never changes its tune. Now, I think something that was important for older audiences to get invested in this is something that, again, is unusual for a modern movie, and this is really the lack of cynicism about the structure. You have Tom Cruise, and he's, of the older generation. He's of the Gen X generation and the Boomer generation. It's like they remember Tom, he's their action hero, really. And in this movie, there's never any question about his superiority to the younger cadets. He's not cadets, they're past school, but it's like, there's never any question that he is in charge and that he's better than them. And this is something that modern sequels are always kind of subverting the accomplishments of the older heroes and wanting to show you that the new heroes are just as good and everything and just as effective as the old ones. And they kind of guilt you for liking the old ones. And you're like, what are you doing, man? So especially, people have their societal reasons for wanting to do that. And that's all fine. But it's like, well, that's not great for a sequel, though. You like the characters from the original, you trust them, you followed them, and that is there's a deeper reason, you could say, for why the original characters should be always better than the new ones, and that's they've paid the price. They've already gone through, you could say, the hero's journey. They've already learned the lessons from the first film. So you start the movie then with younger characters. It's like, well, these are younger characters. They haven't learned the lessons that the old characters have. That's a fact of life in many ways. It's not just a movie thing. It's not, in fitting into the realm of society. It's like, well, have you learned the lessons of life yet? And this movie honors that structure in a way that it felt like older people were able to participate in a newer story in that way. And obviously, all the young people all do their part at the end. So there's no animosity there. It is in a competitive sense, but not in a total sense. I mean, it's not like you have Tom Cruise is not the point of the beach scene. I mean, this would be not understanding what's happening with something like this. So it's more like a proper restoration of the hierarchy, you could say, in this film, and that's maybe what's resonating in this regard. Now, the other thing I want to say about this is obviously, I mean, you could talk about a lot about the cinematography, about how they mounted all the cameras in the cockpit, and they did this for real. This is getting back to this Lumiere brothers way, where it's like, yeah, we're going to show you something incredible, but we're going to actually do it. We're actually going to be in these cockpits and everything. And maybe the better example from the Lumiere brothers is something like Buster Keaton. where it's like there's these just insane stunts that are more or less real, and maybe there's some filming tricks to make things safer, just like with Maverick, obviously. But to a huge extent, what you're seeing are real stunts, real things unfolding, and there is something that is so inherently suspenseful about seeing real stakes involved. And this is how Tom Cruise has made his brand. He has really made the case for himself as being the modern Buster Keaton of cinema, the modern Charlie Chaplin, or the modern Jackie Chan. I mean, this is what Jackie Chan did in the 90s as well. But it's this utter commitment as a star to put yourself on the line. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do my own stunts because I'm the star. That's the whole point. It's like people want to see me go through these things. So because he has such a physical commitment, there is a buy-in that we all have because of that. It's like, no, we can't just have the Navy pilots fly the F-18s and we'll Photoshop Tom into the cockpit. It's like, no, like, we've got to do it. This is the way that the film reaches into the world in some way. It's like, that he does this. These things happened. So, yeah, I mean, this is a very underestimated part of what's happening here. And again, looking at sequels, looking at the right lessons, it's like we have to find a way, without putting people in such insane danger like in these early stunt things. We have to find a way as filmmakers to bring back the real into the blockbuster. I think that's really a huge aspect of what is working in Top Gun Maverick. Now, there is one more thing that I want to say about the style of this, which gets back to the tone. And it is this hopefulness about the film. I mean, I just remember leaving the theater when this movie's over, and it was like, man, I forgot movies could make you feel this way. I forgot this joy. I mean, doesn't this remind you of the ending of the first time you saw Star Wars: A New Hope? And there's just this celebration, And well, this is going to be a deep cut here, but you have J.R.R. Tolkien in his essay. It's called On Fairy Stories, and you could really say fairy stories is going to be confusing for a modern reader. You could say on fantasy, on fairy tales, and everything. But he talks about this idea, which he calls Good Catastrophe, and he says it's the opposite of tragedy. Basically, tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function, but the opposite is true of fairy story. Now, he says fairy story. I think this applies generally to blockbusters, though. This definitely has to do with not subverting your characters, not subverting what you're doing, but it's also, he would say Good Catastrophe is joy, the joy of a happy ending, or more correctly, the good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn. It's like we're in this movie, we think everything's falling apart. This is a movie, it's like been a long time since a blockbuster has been able to convince me that they might actually have the main character die, or someone very important die in this ending. And it's like afterwards, you're like, of course they're going to survive. They tricked me. And that's what a good blockbuster has always done. It's the joyous turn. There it is. And it's like you're not wasting your characters. You used everything that you set up. Nothing was wasted in this script. That's the sign of a good script. Everything you set up comes to fruition. And it's like there's the sudden turn of joy, which Tolkien describes. Obviously, that's in Lord of the Rings. It is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It denies in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, insofar as Evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world, as poignant as grief. So maybe Top Gun falls a little short of that, but the blockbuster is definitely operating with that kind of idea of Good Catastrophe. The sudden joy of a happy ending, and that feeling of elation that you have when you leave this film. I mean, it's like, I can't fly fighter jets, but you hear that music and it's just like, you're there, you don't need to because you saw it happen. Just listen to these chords that just, they rise. It's all upwards. That's musical Good Catastrophe. So I think I want to move on now to some external perspectives here. So we've talked about maybe things that are working in this movie's favor. But we need to also talk about the environment that Top Gun opens into, because obviously this movie was delayed a lot. I'm sure you remember that. So the timing ends up being almost perfect in how they open this film, in a weird way, in an unfortunate way, in the sense of the global perspective here. War in Ukraine starts, Russian invasion of Ukraine. From the Western perspective, we look at this and we say, there doesn't seem to be any justifiable reason for this, and you think about Top Gun as a movie that maybe appeals more to what the business would call the flyover states, so the red states, you could say, appealing to that kind of more of that patriotic military sensibility, which has not had a lot of currency in the blockbuster landscape for a very long time. So Hollywood hasn't been making movies for those people. Here comes a movie that is for those people, so good for them, And then we have a world event here that takes place, and all of a sudden people on the left, people who are not so gung-ho, rah-rah military, they suddenly have a way to participate in this story because they see, oh, maybe our military can do something good. Maybe we need this. Maybe this is a part of reality that we forgot about and that we should have been thinking about. We see this early, February of, we have this Ghost of Kyiv kind of footage. This was a really incredible moment, seeing the Ukrainians fight back. And it was like, wow, it's like, I don't know if Top Gun does as well without footage like this, and it's morbid. I'm not saying, that I am happy that the war started so that Top Gun could do well. Obviously not. But from the perspective of the producers and the filmmakers, it's like the world changed in such a way that their movie became relevant, more relevant than they maybe would have wanted it to be. Now, obviously, Russia's not named in the film or anything. It's just the enemy, but it's like we all know what we're thinking when we see that. So there's these aspects that are beyond a filmmaker's control. There's not much you can do about that, although there was some very canny producing and distribution decisions made just to hold and to wait before releasing the film. And then that ended up really paying off for them. There are also the things that are under their control, which are the handling of some negative press along the way. And I don't know, I probably lost my link here, but let me just go to Google here. You might have forgotten about this, but Taiwanese Flag, there was some controversy before this movie came out about the possibility of them photoshopping out the Taiwanese flag and the Japanese flag from Maverick's jacket here. And this was done ostensibly so that you could please the Chinese market and everything. So word gets out about this, and it's like, there's kind of an uproar and everything. And they go, oh, well, you know what? And I don't know, people say this was Tom Cruise's decision. Probably there's other people as well involved in a decision like that, of course. But it's like they decide to pull the film from China. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to play it there. And so far as I understand, they actually end up putting the flag back in the film. And people in Taiwan watch the film and they cheer when their flag is in the film. So it's like you lost the Chinese box office, but did it pay off? It's like, you bet it did. There was an understanding that they would not just be alienating, the Taiwanese audience, but they would be alienating their core audience, those flyover states, so to speak, by saying, we don't really care about America. We're more interested in the Chinese box office, which is something that Hollywood has been accused of, and probably very fairly, a lot recently. So we can look at a decision of something like this that happened in the opposite direction when we go back to something like The First Man. And then there was this controversy in, I think this was 2018, and in this film, the flag does not play a significant part in the moon landing section. Now it's there, it's in the film, but it isn't given a lot of hullabaloo and everything. And this was sad to me because I quite liked this film, and I kind of thought that this controversy was just stupid. It was like, oh, it's like they give this explanation here, the filmmakers, and in summary, they basically say, well, that's true, but it wasn't really our creative vision. It wasn't that important to what we were trying to do. And that's what they say, and that's how they That's how they damage control in this case. And this movie ends up not doing very well, which was very sad because I thought this was a great film. Obviously, political landscape's a little different then as well, so that's maybe a factor as to why they did that. But it's like they end up alienating a large chunk of their audience. I mean, I remember trying to tell people that I knew would enjoy this film to go watch it, and it was like, nah, I don't think so. And that was very frustrating. Because it doesn't say that much about the film. It's about the environment that it's in. But that's what we're not considering enough anymore. It's like the audience, they don't care about your creativity. They care about what you're showing them. We have to remember what they care about is this. They care about what's in front of the camera. They don't care about us as filmmakers. And that's their right because we're not visible. They care about the sights. They care about seeing something, And so when you say, oh, well, that's not really part of our vision, it's like, well, they know that you don't care about them. You don't care about the things that are interesting to them. So regardless of the quality of the movie, you are getting this sign that the filmmakers are only interested in themselves. So by contrast, you have how Tom Cruise opens Top Gun with this.
Hi, everyone. Well, summer is almost here, and Top Gun Maverick is going to kick it off. Our extraordinary cast and crew gave it their all to bring you the most immersive, authentic, and entertaining cinematic experience. There's real jets, there's real popcorn on the biggest screens exclusively and only in the theaters. So I hope you enjoy. We've made it for you.
We made it for you. That's what's been lost in modern blockbusters. That's the thing that filmmakers, I think, of my generation, those are the things we don't want to hear. This is about our self-expression and everything. That's what we're always told, and that's what we say, and that's what we try to affirm in each other. But at working at this level, it's about them. It's about, we made this for you. So I want to say a little bit about the director, Joseph Kosinski, because I feel like he maybe doesn't get enough credit for what's going on here. Tom Cruise, he has become something of an auteur producer even, or an auteur filmmaker, even as an actor, because his films have such a brand. So, and he's such a good publicity guy that the director, Joseph Kosinski, he really fades into the background here. But I do think he should get some credit for what's going on in this film. So I want to read a little bit here. Let's see, where was it? Okay, yeah, so this is great here. This is Kosinski, and this is an interview, and he's saying, so this project started when Jerry and I flew to Paris to pitch Tom on what my approach would be. I started the discussion with what I thought would be the emotional core of the film, the severed relationship between Maverick and Goose's son set against a dangerous combat mission that would take them both deep into enemy territory. As soon as I said that, I could see the wheels in Tom's head starting to turn. So there's the plot, you could say. Here's the second part. The second part of the pitch was my idea of what Maverick is doing when in the Navy when we meet him in the opening of the film, the whole top secret Dark Star sequence. Then I talked about how we would be able to shoot the whole thing practically by using a new camera system that would allow us to put a camera in the cockpit. And finally, I said that we shouldn't call it Top Gun 2, it should be Top Gun Maverick because it is a character-driven rite of passage story just like the first one. So, Joseph Kosinski, he really saw many of the essential ingredients of this film. Now, I would love to speculate. I would love to know whose thought it was to have the music be so close to the original. Because again, if we go back to that Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner, the opening, you have these kind of Vangelis sounds, but there's no theme. It's just tone. Now for me, when I come to Blade Runner, I'm like, give me the theme. This is what I think of when I think of Blade Runner. It's not just the tone, it's the theme. It's the notes, it's the melody. New Blade Runner is pure tone. There's no theme in the music. And Hans has done this a lot in recent films. You could also look at his No Time to Die score. It's almost like a deconstruction of the Bond theme. And that's aggravating from my perspective. I think people, when they come to sequels, they want the music palette is very deep to how a sequel feels. So good job on the Top Gun team for understanding that deeply and putting in the original music. All right. Any other closing thoughts here? What are the lessons? Can we summarize this? We need to trust the audience. We need to trust that they're interested in what you have to show them. You then, on your part as a filmmaker, you have to actually show things happening. They have to be real things to some degree. There has to be this sense, whether or not it's true, because of the craft that goes into filmmaking. But it needs to feel like you just showed up with a camera and filmed incredible things. And the camera people go home and they say, wow, I saw something amazing. And I hope and pray that I got it in the camera because it was so cool to see it. And it was such a privilege to be there. That's the feeling that you want to have. There's a lack of cynicism, a joy, Good Catastrophe, the joy of an unexpected happy ending. Respect of the past, both tonally, aesthetically, and literally, as far as respect for elders. And finally, just making it for the audience. We made this for you. I think that's the thing that's been lost the most. All right, so I think that's what I've got. I want to do some more of these. I want to talk about the further extent of the Hollywood project, let's say, and why it is the way it is. What are things that filmmakers of the next generation can do? What can audiences do? What can we ask for in films? You know, critics, what can we notice? What things can we point out? I'd love to have all those things in more of a dialogue if possible. I mean, it's just me talking, so whatever, you know. But it's like, let's bring these things out into the open some more and just discuss them. I think there's a lot of possibility in that. We're going to talk about this. We're going to try to fit it into some of the larger perspective a bit more. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.